A decade ago, a book fundamentally changed how I and others looked at how an organization could grow. Exponential Organizations was the result of a deep research project to uncover the practical things that leaders had done to grow their organizations 10 times faster than conventional market leaders, using new technologies and ways of working. Today, its author, Salim Ismail, is in huge demand to advise CEOs and heads of state. One reason being that the data shows that organizations adopting EXO attributes deliver 40 times shareholder value compared to those who don't. Tune in to a vital conversation on the evolving leader.
Hey folks, welcome to The Evolving Leader, a show born from the belief that we need deeper, more accountable, more holistic, more well understood, and more human leadership to confront the biggest challenges facing us in the world today. I'm Scott Allender.
And I'm John Gomes.
How are you feeling today, Mr. Gomes? What are you bringing with you into the Evolving Leader studio?
I am beside myself. I've been waiting to talk to our guest for a very long time. I've been reading his work for a very long time. I've been immersed in it. I've been using it. I've been working with people who work with him. So yeah, I couldn't be more excited, I have to say. I'm trying to control my enthusiasm. How are you feeling, Scott?
Similar. You introduced me to our guest's book a decade ago, I think almost, and I love it, and I am feeling all the excitement to have this conversation. So let's jump in. Today we are joined by a true pioneer, a strategist who advises business leaders and heads of state. His book, Exponential Organizations, has been one of the most widely read by CEOs over the past decade, looking for a new way to navigate uncertainty and embrace disruptive technologies and business models. One reason for this is the data that shows that organizations adopting exponential organization attributes deliver 40x shareholder value compared to those who don't. It's just incredible. He is the founder and chairman of OpenExO, which helps companies implement the EXO playbook. He is a serial entrepreneur, a VP at Yahoo, the founding executive director of Singularity University, and serves on the board of XPRIZE Foundation. John, I know you've not only a massive fan of his work, but you've also been to Singularity events, and this is going to be an incredible conversation. So, Salim, welcome to The Evolving Leader.
Great to be here.
Salim, welcome to the show. How are you feeling today?
Very well. Things are kind of, I'm in the, I was asked by one of my board members, and I remember a quote where somebody said, "How are you feeling?" And the answer was, "I'm hanging on by my fingernails and fate is pouring oil from above." I think the visual is a pretty good one for most leaders today.
Yeah, that's a really great metaphor or way of bringing to life. So by a way of an introduction and acknowledging some of our listeners, I don't know who they are, but may not be familiar with your work with exponential organizations. Can we start with the basics? Can you give us a refresher on the core principles of exponential organizations?
Sure. It's important to note that it came from 7 years of building Singularity University and leading most of the programs there, right? So I have this framing that we have 20 Gutenberg moments of technology disruption hitting us at the same time, AI being just one of them. Autonomous cars, drones, life extension, blockchain, solar energy, the list just goes on. And the challenge is most of our organizations are designed for efficiency and for predictability. And for about 100 years, that was how we kind of designed all our organizations, because markets didn't change that often. And therefore, you could do strategic planning in a very traditional way, etc. And what we noticed starting in about 2010 was that there was a completely different modality where organizations had learned how to scale the org structure as fast as you could scale technology. And we'd never seen this before. And so we looked at a couple of hundred of the fastest growing unicorns and said, how are they doing it? TED leveraging its community to scale to a global brand. or Uber not hiring its own staff, or Airbnb tapping into other people's bedrooms. And so we teased out a model. And importantly, we didn't invent anything. We just labeled what was going on and put it into a cohesive framework. And then the book is half analytical and half prescriptive, the original book, on how do you apply the model. And it's now been 10 years where we have data, evidence, anecdotes, etc. We just launched the second edition last year, updating it, the data, and B, looking at the nuances of the model. And we're very excited about the idea. And it's pretty clear to us. One of my head of community calls us the decade of the EXO, because it's pretty clear that by the end of the next few years, pretty much every organization in the world will be leveraging these characteristics, whether it's a nonprofit or an impact project or a for-profit or government department, just because we can see that it's better.
So at the front of the book, you recap the EXO mind map, which is now like a mental tattoo for many leaders. Can you give us a sense of the origin story and what was the source of why and how these companies thought and acted so differently from conventional organizations?
Yeah, I think the birthplace for this is, for us, Amazon Web Services. Because when that launched, you could take computing off the balance sheet and make it a variable cost, and then scale your costs along with your user base if you were a software company. And that for us was an important inflection point, because for the first time, you didn't have to make a major capital investment before you launch your product, right? And this led to the lean startup movement and to hyperscaling and all the other movements that go get a product out there. As Reid Hoffman famously said, if you're not embarrassed by your product when you launch it, you waited too long, right? So you get it out there and then use data to iterate very, very aggressively to iterate the product. And then you can't be beaten because you're constantly going to where the evidence is as to where things are, what tactics are working, etc. My most famous example of this is probably Amazon Prime, where there's all this naysayers at Amazon saying this will not work. People are going to order a toothbrush at a time, and we're going to lose money on each transaction because of the delivery costs, and this will be a disaster. And the only way to test whether it worked or not was to run an experiment. And so they ran an experiment and found that people that use it buy tons more and buy tons more together, and therefore they didn't lose money. And now everybody uses it. Nobody ever unsubscribed from Amazon Prime, right? And so you see the outcome when you're operating with that modality if you're a truly flexible organization. And the heuristics here are flexibility, adaptability, agility, and being purpose-driven. And all the characteristics in the EXO model guide towards those few heuristics. And if you can move to that, then basically in a world that's becoming more and more volatile, your ability to adapt will drive market value. And the data you reference, which I could touch on a little bit more, really, really reflects that.
So since you wrote the book, a lot has changed, particularly with the sheer speed at which new players are getting to scale. Can you kind of bring that to life for us?
What we've been seeing is that more and more organizations are following this trend, and there's a huge bifurcation in how we build organizations now. There's either new organizations that are following models like this, and even if they're not consciously saying EXO, they're using attributes, that's fine. And then there's companies that are trying to maintain their status quo, and those are basically falling off a cliff, right? And let me just reflect on the data study we did. So in 2015, when the book, a few months after the book first came out, we actually analyzed the Fortune 100 against this model and said, okay, is Goldman Sachs purpose-driven? Is GE leveraging community? Is IBM using dashboards and lean OKRs or not, etc.? And we kind of came up with an index. We scored them all from 1 to 100, and I did a segment on Squawk Box, the TV program, saying here's an index of the Fortune 100 ranked by how flexible, agile, EXO friendly are they. 7 years later, he did a trailing analysis. One of our community members who'd done a bunch of work for UBS tracked for 7 years the top 10 that use the characteristics the most and the bottom 10 that use them the least, and found that revenue growth was 3x higher, profitability 6x higher, and to your earlier point, shareholder returns were 40 times higher, right? And that kind of gives you a very clear guidance that if you're not going to navigate towards this type of a model, you're not going to be around very long. The second thing that I think we found over the decade is the nuances and the interdependencies between the attributes, which we didn't quite expect when we first wrote the book, because there we just had no experience with it. But for example, GE trained 60,000 executives on lean startup thinking, the biggest corporate training exercise in business history, and it failed. And the reason it failed is if you can't do experimentation without allowing autonomy as to what to experiment on, right? And so we found, I think the big difference between the first and second book of the data and the validity of the model and the evidence we have, but B, we teased out some of the interdependencies and how do you now progressively and prescriptively apply the model in a powerful way.
So in organizations where they are trying to stay more status quo, and you're trying, they're more conventional. What are some of the challenges you're seeing in bringing this to them, in terms of kind of changing their mindset, getting them to adopt the playbook?
It comes down to one, which is, I call it the immune system problem, right? And I first came across this at Yahoo when I was the head of innovation running their incubator. And it turned out the more disruptive a product we created, the less the company could absorb it and handle it and take advantage of it. And of course, I've seen this at banks or telcos before, but Yahoo was a Silicon Valley company less than 10 years old. Why should it have this problem? And it really bothered me. And it wasn't until I had a conversation with Jeff Kowalski, the CTO of Autodesk, who said, oh, immune system problem. And I kind of went deep on that. And we realized that every big organization, when you try anything disruptive, the default answer is no. And therefore, as the world is now being driven by disruptive innovation, which is the high order bit, big organizations, the legacy organizations, have to figure out how to juxtapose with this. Otherwise, they won't be around. And a really great example of this is the car industry, where for years and years and years, they said Tesla's going to fail, it's never going to work, we do cars, we've been doing cars forever, and boom, the market cap of Tesla at some point was, all the others combined. And I think that, and they would say that companies were hugely overvalued. And I'm like, yeah, but would you rather be them or you? So there's this unbelievable legacy recalcitrance in understanding and adopting this, just because literally, there's simply not an MBA program in the world yet today that teaches you how to build Uber, right? Every MBA program in the world teaches you how to build a 20th century scalable, efficiency, predictable, or highly structured organization, top-down hierarchical command and controls. And the world has completely changed. And I have this crazy anecdote I could talk about with the deans of business schools, if you want me to do something.
Yes, please.
So I got asked about 6 years ago to speak at a conference of 700 deans of business schools. Like, who knew? But apparently they all get together once a year. And the announcer asked me to come and give the opening keynote. And I'm like, wow, I'd love to kind of talk to that audience. So I get on stage and he's introducing me, saying, oh, we're going to hear from Salim, the latest he's seen with Exponential from the XPRIZE. Except what he sees in the audience is complete blank stares, no flicker of reaction at all. And he notices this, and he's like, just a quick show of hands. How many of you read Exponential? 700 deans of business schools, and 2 put up their hands.
Wow.
Right? And you're like, are you kidding? That's unbelievable. I mean, okay, if I'm a car designer, I may or may not like the Tesla, but I should jolly well know what it's about. And the fact that they had no idea that this even existed just completely blew my mind. And the fellow took me aside later. Later, of course, I was mobbed, and they were like, hey, how can we partner with you, et cetera, et cetera. Later on, I found out that the deans of all the business schools, they're researchers. None of them run a business. So they're all focused on the little areas of research, and none of them practically have applied it. And it just completely shocked me that this is what people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to get that type of education.
That's incredible.
And you still think that's the same kind of deal now, that it hasn't changed that much?
Yeah, because when I talk about immune systems, the 3 worst immune systems I've ever seen, third worst is healthcare. The second worst is education and academia. Like, God help you if you're trying to update that. The worst being religion. Right. Where they'll literally kill you if you don't, follow the orthodoxy. I actually got probably the strangest phone call I've received was a few years ago from the Vatican saying, look, the Pope's trying to change the church. His immune system is 2,000 years old. So I actually went and did a workshop with the 80 senior leaders there, and it was one of the more eye-popping experiences I've ever had. Because the fundamental change that's coming, right, is something that people need to recognize and then just deal with. Just talk about life extension, right? I mean, that changes a lot of things in society if you suddenly extend or double human lifespan, which we're likely to do in the next decade. Pension plans, insurance models, unemployment benefits. I mean, it cuts through the entire stack of what it means to be alive and how civilization is structured. The specific conversation at the Vatican I had was, your business model is to sell heaven. And how are you going to sell heaven if people aren't dying? Right. And that's a conversation to be had. How do you adapt to that?
Hmm. There's a chapter in the book, I love the title of it, which is The Death of the Linear Organization. Now that may, in the light of the things that we've been talking about, seem fairly obvious, but can we talk about how you embrace non-linearity? What does that mean to the conventional ways of thinking and structuring an organization?
Great question. Maybe the most important question is, how do you deal with it, right? And this is a conversation I'm having increasingly with boards and C-suites around the world. There's only one model that we've found in the kind of 15 years I've been looking at this, and 10 years since the book came out, which is, if you have a legacy organization, you have to run an immune system disruptor in the core organization. Well, we've developed a 10-week engagement that we've open sourced. We piloted with Procter & Gamble, and we found a way of hacking culture at scale in a legacy environment. You have to run that to change the conversation, soften people up, etc. Then what you do is that every organization has about 5% of their employees and team members that are completely crazy, very hard to manage, very smart, very loyal, right? And you never know if you're going to get them, they're going to be fired or they're going to stick around. It's 50-50 kind of thing. And you take those folks to the edge and have them build disruptive exponential organizations at the edge of the organization, pointing into adjacent spaces. So Larry Page a few years ago came to me and said, hey, your Unity Yahoo's released at Frostport. Should I have an incubator at Google? And I said, no, you'll have this immune system problem, but do something like it, keep it stealth and point it away from the core organization. And along with many other conversations that he had, you see the result as Google X, where they have the core information management inside Google, but then use hardware, Google Cars, Google contact lenses, Loon, etc., to go into adjacent areas. In my opinion, the master of this technique is Apple. And yes, they have a great design capability and a great technology supply chain. I argue that Apple's real innovation is actually organizational, because what they will do, and what nobody even noticed that they do, is they will form a small team that's very disruptive, put the team at the edge of the organization, keep them secret and stealth, and say to them, go disrupt another industry. And whether it's cars or watches or payments or retail, there's no limit to their market cap. They just have, I think at last count, Intel, they have 18 teams looking at different industries. And when they think something's ready for disruption, they pop into it, and then they iterate very well, right? And so therefore, that model is something that I think will, and then they fold it all back into the broader ecosystem. And you see Uber doing that with Uber Health and Uber Eats. You see Facebook doing that with Instagram and WhatsApp, leaving these brands with the edges rather than trying to merge them in. And so the transformation that's taking place over the last kind of 50, 70 years is operating company turning into platform, turning into ecosystem. The problem is, if you're a 20-year C-suite leader in a legacy organization, you have no mechanism for understanding this, seeing it, migrating to it. And then if you get it, how do you get the rest of your organization to follow you? Right? And so this is most of the work that I've been doing, which is why I'm bald.
I wish I had an excuse for why I'm bald. I'm just bald.
Can you bring to light this conversation about, you're talking with, and I don't want you to reveal all the secrets, obviously we haven't got time for that, but you're talking to a CEO about making the shift from running a conventional linear type of organization to this ecosystem approach, which can adapt to the opportunities and challenges facing it. What do they need to do as an individual to make that kind of change?
honestly, as an individual, they need a mindset shift. And the
Yeah.
biggest mindset shift they need to make is the disruptive mindset and the exponential mindset. Okay. And let me explain in a couple lines what I mean by that. The disruptive or change-based mindset basically says you have to recognize that the world is fundamentally changing. It's never going to be the same again. The market you thought you had doesn't really exist. Even the market you're in, you don't really understand it. So therefore, you have to give autonomy to your teams to gather as much data and run as many experiments as possible to keep tabs on what's happening. Because you have no clue by definition. Okay? That's one. And I think the second is the exponential mindset where you place your bets in anything that could grow in a radical fashion. The master of this particular mindset is Elon, where his methodology for building a company is actually absurdly simple. He will look at a technology that's growing exponentially and doubling on a price performance pattern, solar energy, lithium-ion batteries, neural interfaces, whatever. And then he'll look at 10 years. Where will that technology be on a 10-year doubling pattern? And then he'll build a company to intercept that curve, because it takes about 10 years to build a global company. Now, non-trivial to last that 10 years, right? But if you can do it, then you catch that curve as of going vertical. And now, for example, lithium-ion batteries have dropped 93% in the last 10 years. Okay? The cost. That's unbelievable. So now the cost of building a $20,000 Tesla is really incredible compared to a Tesla that was 10 years ago. So the exponential mindset and the disruptive kind of change-based mindset is two important things to the CEO. Then tactically, what you do is you take your crazy people to the edge and go follow your passion, pick a project, create an MTP or massive transformative purpose for that project, etc. Once in a while, you see a legacy organization actually doing it, and kind of hats off to them. My kind of favorite example of this is Philip Morris, which makes cigarettes. I did a session with the board about 10 years ago, and it was a little delicate because I said, "What's your purpose? Your purpose can't be to have people smoke. That's not a viable structure going forward." And along with a bunch of other conversations, absolutely not just me. They voted and collectively got together as an employee base, as a management team, as stakeholders and shareholders, and fundamentally changed the company. The head of innovation called me about 5 years ago and said, "Go have a look at our website." And literally their MTP is a smoke-free future. Right? And you're like, is this a parody? Is this like this? It's like unbelievable. But they did it. They did a 180-degree pivot. And all of the bonuses for the executives now come from smoke-free products and wellness products, which is kind of incredible. And so once in a while, you'll see a company really taking it on. But most of the ways, you have to kind of launch these and let the new thing become the gravity center. Because if the second order of success that we found is if you launch these things at the edge, like Amazon launching web services or etc., you can't bring them back in. Because if it's disruptive, it won't fit neatly, right? And all you'll do is kill it, which is what is the pattern of a legacy organization. You have to float it off and let it be the new thing. So, for example, Amazon Web Services. Do you know about the Amazon institutional yes?
Yes.
Can I describe this real quick? So
Yeah, please
Amazon, Jeff Bezos realized early on that it's really hard in a big company to say to get disruptive ideas handled. It's easy to say no, and 1 to 20 people will say no, and it'll kill the idea. So he came up with a blocker for this, and the idea is a policy called the institutional yes. So if you're inside Amazon, you come to me with an idea, and I'm your manager. My default answer must be yes. I'm not allowed to say no. If I want to say no, I have to write a 2-page thesis on why it's a bad idea and post it publicly in the intranet. So they've created friction and embarrassment to saying no. We need that many more ideas. Because if you come to me, it's much easier for me to say, "You're an idiot, that idea is never going to work," but you go right ahead and you deal with the embarrassment, and then I can kind of wash my hands of it. And actually, Amazon Web Services was one of the outcomes of this. Nobody could figure out how to say no to it, nothing to do with their core strategy. And now it's delivering 75% of their global profits, right? That's just the most unbelievable concept. And And I've got a kind of another model around this. One of the biggest hotel chains in the world is worth about, I'll give you the negative use case here. And one of the biggest hotel chains in the world is worth about $70 billion. Okay. If they had launched Airbnb, TripAdvisor, Booking.com, their market cap would be closer to $300 billion. And the reason I use that example is all those ideas were sitting inside the company, but the immune system would not let them out. So for fear of cannibalizing the existing model, they're literally leaving 4x on the pool. And that is the pattern that has to be broken. And this conversation 10 years ago was very hard. Right? When I'm sitting down with the CEO of some BMW or something, there's just no play in this. They're like, yeah, we'll kill Tesla in a year. 10 years later, it's a much easier conversation across industry, etc. So I thought I was late when the book came out. It turns out I was maybe a decade early.
Let's zoom in on the purpose comment you made about Philip Morris. You said MTP, which stands for Massive Transformational Purpose, as a real strategic imperative that moves far beyond the sort of like bumper sticker approach to purpose or sort of writing a purpose statement on the wall. But you're talking about something that really transforms an organization. And you used a great example with Philip Morris. Can you hone in on the concept a little bit more and why that's so critical in the exponential model?
Yeah, so when we analyzed those 200 unicorns way back in the day, we had a big graph and we had a big matrix. Okay, who's doing what? Tick boxes, Uber does this, they use dashboards, they use AI. And we had and what they had uniformly across all of them was it was very clear what problem they were trying to solve. Uber, everybody should have their private driver. Google, organize the world's information, etc. And they all had it. Right? And we were like, wow, this is like really important. Every one of these EXOs so we came up with the framing of a massive transformative purpose, saying you have to go for a really big problem. It has to be transformative, and it has to be very purpose-driven. And that gives the ethical basis of an EXO and future organizations, because this applies to nonprofits. Governments have a national entity, etc. So I coined the phrase, I think it was about late 2012. And then it was in the book, and as time went on, people started driving this purpose-driven ethos a lot more. Why? Because if you have an MTP, it excites an entire community to swarm around you, like Elon with SpaceX, right? Every engineer in the world is dying to work for SpaceX or a company like that, or Tesla, right? And so it creates a gravity well where everybody wants to get involved. And what's really magical about it is if you're an evolved leader in your framing, if let's say my MTP is to cure cancer, okay, and I'm kind of plugging away doing my thing. If somebody else solves that problem, I'm thrilled to bits because it's such a big problem. We're going to spend lifetimes trying to figure this out. Therefore, kind of you end up with a much more cooperative environment rather than a winner take all network company typical model. And so it changed the ethos. And also we found was in big companies, 99% of the conversation is about what's happening inside the company. And when you have an MTP, you can start looking outside, whereas people are like, okay, how are we going to deliver that MTP? Right? When some leaders at Google are trying to evaluate this project or this project, they can simply ask the heuristic of which one helped organize the world's information better, and then put their resources there. And so it propagates in a very powerful way, creates community around you. And for us, the future of most organizations will be a purpose with a community around it, and then products and services pulling out from that community.
So how, because everybody's talking about AI at the moment, how does AI change, or does it change what's happening with your work?
It does radically better. So a couple of important points around AI here. I absolutely don't believe AI takes all the jobs. In fact, I don't think it takes any jobs, to be blunt. Okay. Why? Because the evidence we've seen when we've had major technology interventions in the past is we increase job employment, not decrease. So we can talk more about that if you want to get into that. But I look at it as a slide rule to Excel spreadsheet transformation. It's just this massive game changer in how we think about things and what allows us to do. I think the thing that I'm most excited about is it will eliminate a huge area of what I call white-collar drudgery. So let's say I'm a booking agent for a family resort in the Caribbean, right? And a family calls up and says, we've got 3 families coming. We want to have rooms that are adjoining. The kids should be near the pool. There's all this complexity. I could spend like a day and a half trying to figure out that crap. Whereas an AI is going to go, oh, give them these 3 rooms and you're done, right? And so, especially with the advent of generative AI. And so I think there's an enormous ability now to really uplift most organizations. I'll give you a simple example. We came across a company recently. It looked like Palantir in a box. Okay. And what they do is they drop an AI into your organization, into your backend servers, and they suck up all the Salesforce and Slack data or whatever, and they instantly can store all institutional knowledge. So if a key employee leaves, you don't lose all of their insights with them. Okay? That's just a complete game changer right there in terms of a concern about how do you manage your organization, the redundancy you have to have in various roles, all that stuff. So I think AI will become a massive game changer in the cleaning up internal processes, and over time, it will replace the need for more and more work. But if you think about, say, software development or truck driving is a great example, right? We kind of, you hear all this moaning about, oh my God, autonomous trucks are coming and we're going to have 3 million jobs out of the window, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas if you go and talk to any of the trucking companies, they're like, we would hire 1,000 truck drivers today. We just can't find them because nobody really wants to do that work. So we will absolutely need autonomous cars. In places like Japan and China especially with the aging problem, need robotics and AI to do a lot of the work going forward. So I think as a societal level, the technology will be massively a game changer on the positive side.
One of the things that we are constantly asking ourselves and our guests here is around, as AI comes into more and more of our lives, what do organizations need to do to ensure that it kind of lifts people up and that you get more of the very precious aspects of human value creation, decision-making, creativity, relationships, all of the kind of stuff that people are brilliant at, rather than getting them pushed down into more kind of almost serving the technology?
Well, I think if you go back to my earlier comment about the white-collar drudgery, that will solve, I mean, the job satisfaction that people will get having that problem handled in 2 seconds. It's like going back to the old days when you had to kind of tap out on a cash register the different line items and add it up at the end and do a big ching, and this thing would print out, and then you try and collect the money. And now it's all digitized completely, where you just wand it. Okay, no cashier wants to go back to the old days. Right? So we forget that part of it. We worry about the kind of like, oh my God, what will people do, etc. But we forget that we enable, generally when you have an injection of technology, it uplifts the value. The human can do much more customer service and deal with the exception handling and the harder, difficult problems, which is the way more fun stuff to do. And so I think if I just follow that meme and that vector over time, AI just makes things a lot better and faster. Like, for example, imagine an AI is tracking all the conversations and comes to you every 2 days and says, this is the biggest HR problem you have right now, right? And it's surfacing problems that you could not surface in other ways. And I think this is the key part about AI that most people miss, is that people think it's going to replace human endeavor, whereas I think what it's going to do is orthogonally add massive capability to human endeavor.
So there's a lot in there, I think, in terms of mindset, right? So, going back to the cash register example, I'm sure at the time when there was, I'm speculating, but when there was talk about the sort of scanning, I'm sure there was fear that it produced in the cashiers in terms of what does this mean?
Huge.
So it's, there's always that unknown, right? So it's like we're always moving towards the unknown. So as you work with organizations or a leader who wants to adopt some of these principles and push the organization into the unknown, how do you help, or how can they help an organization ready themselves to have a tolerance for the unknown with an optimism for what's going to be possible by adopting these principles?
So I think the biggest challenge that I see with humanity writ large is what Peter identified in the book Abundance, where what he calls the amygdala. Right? So we all have in the back of our brains this little organ that's about the size of a walnut that's constantly scanning for bad news. And it's a danger warning signal. When we were running around on the plains of Africa, if you heard a noise in the bushes, you ran. Why? Because bad news could kill you. If you waited around to see if it was your friend, the tiger ate you. Okay? So we're 10 times more likely to pay attention to bad. If I missed a piece of good news, I might miss some fruitful activity. If I missed a piece of bad news, I likely died back when we were fraught with danger in our environment. So we relate to uncertainty and unknown as danger, and then our amygdala lights up and we run from it. So anything new, like if you talk to somebody when they first come across autonomous cars, the first reaction is, oh my God, the car might kill somebody, ban the car, right? Because people don't want to be killed by robots. They'd much rather be killed by drug people, which is what's happening today. So we have to overcome this. And it turns out we're 10 times more likely to pay attention to negative news than positive news because of that old survival bias, which is why Fox News does very well, right? If you watch Fox News, you're going to die this week. If you're lucky, you last till next week. Peter calls CNN the crisis news network because when you can track every bank robbery in real time, high definition, streamed to 20 devices, you think the world is going to hell, and then you vote on that. And this is the mismatch that we have with the news cycle today, where good stuff doesn't report it, right? The world is an infinitely better place than we've ever had it in the history of humanity. And very few people will share that view because they just live in the negativity because their amygdala is lighting off all the time. So I think if I could make an evolutionary change to humanity today, it would be just to put out that amygdala, because the amount of time in our lives that we're faced with real physical existential threat is near zero. And yet it dominates our conversations.
So what is kind of on the horizon for you right now, Salim? What are you really excited about in terms of trying to bring more of the thinking here to the wider world? What are you doing in Singularity University and other things that you're doing? What's the thrust of your future?
So I think there's so Singularity is doing a great job of training executives and people on here's the future of technology and be aware of it. We've provided, and that gives the why should you kind of pay attention to this. We've provided the how. Here's how you go about doing this. What's happened about a few years ago, a political consulting firm came to me and said, hey, we used your book to advise heads of state. And I was like, that was totally not designed for that. What are you talking about? And when I looked into it, it turned out to be several dozen heads of state. I was like, wait, we have a community and a tool set and some credibility, but now we have access. And so I did like a year of psychedelics to try and get my head around what the future holds, because that's a gift from the universe you have to take. And I've been thinking about how would you rewire society at scale and think and navigate the future, because all our institutions are going to break with the onslaught of all of this technology. The famous biologist E.O. Wilson put it best. He said, the problem with humanity is our emotions are Paleolithic, our institutions are medieval, and our technology is godlike. And if you think about that, pretty much all the problems in the world come from the gaps in those three layers. And as leaders, if all evolving leaders are going to spend the next 20 years of our careers dealing with those gaps, because the technology is moving at its pace. You can't slow that down. So we have to kind of bring humanity up. And individuals we have a pretty good tool set to navigate individuals. Where I think the biggest weakness, and if I could think about it from a leadership perspective, is how do we update our institutions? Because we have no mechanism or feedback loop of updating old institutions like the UN or monetary systems or legal systems or healthcare systems. Intellectual property is broken, education is broken. That, I think, is the biggest challenge. So we've been thinking about how would we rethink society in that model. I have this hobby in metaphysics and philosophy, okay? And I did this TEDx talk called "How Do You Fix Civilization?" At the time, my 90-year-old dad came to it, and he puts up his hand. And he goes, "I heard about your talk. Can I heckle?" And I'm like, "Yeah, of course you can heckle." He goes, "I totally disagree with your talk." And I said, whoa, okay, do you not think you need to fix civilization, really? He's like, no, the fixing, obviously. But the problem I have with civilization is we have not civilized the world, we've materialized the world. We're apes with tools acting with a genomic animality that we have tribal wars at scale now. All we've been a scaled tribal conflict. And you look at the Middle East, it's like, of course he's right. And his comment was, we still have to do the work to civilize the world. I was like, wow, wisdom bomb from the elders, right? Boom. And I've been thinking a lot about how do we actually go about that in an era where our existing institutions don't work, our religions don't apply, and the technological change is hurtling us ever fast. Because the one instinct is slow it down, but you can't slow it down. And so what do? And so we have to kind of accelerate our human endeavor and our human organization to better cope with this. And really, when you have new technology injection, the big challenge is always how do you extract a promise without the peril? Because I can use fire to heat my house and I can use it to burn down your house. And via our secular laws around the world, we've done a pretty good job of doing that over the century. But now the technological innovation is so high between CRISPR and gene sequencing and editing and organ transplants and Lord knows what, that our institutions are all going to break in the face of this. I don't know if you saw the story about the Uber car crash a few weeks ago. So a couple in an Uber had a bad car crash and they sued Uber. Okay, and so they were going through this lawsuit, and then what happened was their 12-year-old daughter ordered something from Uber Eats by using their account, and on Uber Eats it says you cannot sue, and so by accidentally it wiped out their entire legal case because it's just we can't even handle internet from a legal regulatory perspective. Forget everything else that's coming. Right. And so I think this is a big challenge that we have as a global species right now.
So can you give us just a couple of insights into how you think our institutions do need to evolve? The fact that they are unable to because of the kind of
there
the
are
way
two
they're
things.
set up.
There's the immune system problem. Okay, but let's take education, because I've got a fair bit of experience in that world given Singularity, and I get asked a lot. And I've been talking to many of you heads of state looking at how do you think. So I was talking to one of the bigger countries in Southeast Asia, to the Minister of Education. This is literally about 3 months ago. And he's like, yeah, I've got a big problem. I need to hire 40,000 English language teachers in the country. And I'm like, hello, AI can teach you English in 2 seconds. Now, you don't need 40,000 people. And he's like, I can't do that. I have to hire people. Right. And that problem is what needs to be solved. Because today, you could take all the healthcare data, you could take all the legal data, all the legislature, all the legal laws, and take all the educational data and put it into 3 different LLMs for any country, and give a kid 3 links: a doctor, a tutor, and a lawyer. And you just have to sit back while they do that. You just need to get out of the way, is my opinion. And we keep trying to control where things are going, and we can't. All we do is slow down the progress. And so therefore, I think what needs to happen is, if I was thinking from an evolved leadership perspective, is let the technology out, police the negative use cases, and then you go forward from that. There's a really great little insight here. If I could throw out a data point. 20 years ago, when we had eBay and Craigslist emerging as major kind of platforms to do e-commerce, it's pretty easy on eBay to fake a transaction. I can put a picture of a MacBook up, you send me $1,000 and I'm off to eBay, right? I can mask my email address pretty quickly. So sociologists and anthropologists are really excited, saying, okay, we can actually study human nature at scale, okay? So now we have millions of transactions. What's the actual ratio of good to bad? And it turns out consistently across Craigslist, eBay, and other platforms like this, the ratio of positive to fraudulent transactions turns out to be consistently something like 8,000 to 1. And that should give you enormous optimism for humanity. Because in an open playing field where I can do either, 8,000 to 1 is the ratio consistently. Okay? So that means if you have a new technology like drones, our first instinct is ban the drones because somebody negatively loaded up with SQL and friend flagged the White House. Whereas the proper thing, and the bad character is not, so we ban the drones. The bad guy's not listening to the regulations anyway. So that doesn't help. And all you do is stop all the good innovation. Whereas if we had said, everybody do whatever they want with it, you'd have all this unbelievable explosion of innovation. And then you put the regulatory and put in the police the negative use cases, society would benefit way more. And I think that kind of mentality needs to seep into our, how do we think about regulatory institutional institutions, etc. And that's just not there.
That's an interesting insight, really, to understand that 8,000 to 1.
Crazy.
The other side of that, and it is reassuring. The other side of it is that as an exponential organization becomes more successful, it also gets more powerful, and then its moral responsibility becomes even greater. And many of the organizations that have done this have questionable moral kind of code in them.
Very much so. But I think where that happens, the market tends to figure things out a little bit. But for example, I'm a cheapskate, so I never take surge pricing on Uber. I have a friend who was always late, so he always accepts it. And we can be standing next to each other, order the same car to the same destination. He'll be told 3 times the price. Because they've gamed it down. They know he's going to pay extra, so they just give him a big fee every time. Right? And that's just, that in certain levels. And the driver's getting very little of that. It would be okay if the driver got a big cut. The driver's getting almost none of that upside. So there's some nasty practices in some of these, but I think competition helps with some of that. I don't know how we navigate this, but what we found is if you have an MTP, generally organizations are trying to do the right thing.
If you were sitting down with a CEO or one of our leaders right now who want to adopt the EXO playbook, what would you advise them to do as sort of first steps?
So we have, over the years, we now have a community of something like 40,000 consultants, entrepreneurs, innovators, technologists in a giant community in 150 countries. And so what we do is we have a weekly EXO discovery call. You basically say, come to the call, get a sense of what it's about. And then we pair you up with a coach from the community. And we have a very inexpensive, I think we charge like 10 or 20K for this, an EXO Ready program where in a week or two, we analyze your company, score it against the model, and then create a roadmap for the organization for the future. And so then the CEO has a clear roadmap on how to 10X the organization and implement these, because those nuances of which ones are you doing already, etc., we can navigate a lot of that. And so we are able to launch those. We're doing a whole bunch of those where CEOs will call us, we'll go, hey, go talk to this coach, run this 2-week exercise, and then you can do it yourself or ask some of the coaches for more help.
And if you were talking to somebody who was, I don't know, 14, 15, 16, and they were asking you for advice about how to think about the future, where would you start that conversation?
Oh, very easy. So I'll speak a little bit to education, back to education just for a second, okay? We've been doing education on what I would call a push basis or a supply side basis for the last 2-3 years, where the education system, you train them through their early 20s to be really good at one particular skill, which was, whether it was podcast host or graphics designer or accountant or engineer or doctor or whatever. And then you went to the job market and sold those skills in the job market. But all education for the last couple of 100 years has been supply side. I think what's happening now is moving over to the demand side. We say, what problem do you want to fundamentally solve as an adult? What's your purpose, etc., which moves you over to the demand side. Elon is the great flag bearer for this because he had no experience in the car or energy or space sectors, and yet he's built market leaders in all of them, right? And so when you can move somebody over to the demand side and say, what big problem do you want to solve? And then it drops out of that what technologies, what techniques, what skill sets we need to solve that, and that drives your education from that perspective. So that's one major shift happening in education. It's going to happen no matter what, and it's happening in front of us. What I say to young people is pick your MTP, and it doesn't have to be your ever forever MTP. What gets you excited now, right? And then go join a startup or build a startup doing that. Because today there's no environment in which you can use leverage legacy environments to learn very well. So it used to be that people who joined GE or Procter & Gamble to go through management training schools and et cetera, and it just doesn't apply. It turns out, by the way, the best leadership training in the world today is playing World of Warcraft. So, the younger generation has kind of figured it out. We just need to get out of their way, is my view.
What haven't we talked about that's really important to you that we should close our conversation with?
Well, first, I just want to acknowledge the work you guys do is so important because, when it comes down to leadership, the future of leadership is one of the most important topics today. And you can see the fundamental lack of leadership and toxic leadership around the world. And so the work that you're doing along with others is probably some of the most important work in the world today in that realm. I think if I had to pick an area to talk about, it would be probably in the mindset realm. We finished the second edition of the book with what are the mindsets you need to have, like the exponential mindset. And I think it'd be a really amazing exercise for people to, as they're making any kind of a business decision, what mindsets are at play right now in my head, driving the decision, and are they the right mindset? Because if you're coming from, say, a fear or cautiousness or a whatever, you really need some future-focused mindset, gratitude, experimental mindset, trust, etc. One of my community members, Jerry McCallsky, put up this amazing framing. He said, scarcity equals abundance minus trust. And you're like, you have to think about it for like an hour. And because if we can solve trust, then we can get to abundance. And I think one thing to think about would be, how do we navigate the world as technology delivers abundance to us? And this is where everything has to shift to a different side of the equation, whether it's education going from demand to supply to demand side, or business models going from scarcity to abundance model, etc. And I think navigating that is a big challenge, and being open enough to make that leap and live from the other side is probably the biggest heuristic I think about for leaders. Right now, the best path we have are podcasts like yours or psychedelics, or both, and that's the path to follow.
What's the mindset that you struggle most with? Because it was hard to imagine, that you do, but where do you find yourself kind of like at the edge?
So I have a framing for the human condition, which has your soul in the middle of it, your subconscious filters at one level, and then your conscious filters on the other side. And I maintain the point that our job as a human being is either work with that kaleidoscope so your soul expresses in some way, or dissolve those barriers so that the soul can just express. Right? So a figure like a Christ or a Buddha did the work to dissolve all of it. They're just being these shining light. Whereas if you take, say, a Tiger Woods, they rotate that kaleidoscope. They're really good at golf. And you can see a soul expression there, the Messi playing soccer, but they're somewhat compromised in other areas of their lives, what they say. And so how do you navigate yourself as a leader going forward? And I think a lot about when I'm making a choice, what level is it coming from? Is it coming from my conscious level, subconscious level, soul level? And do I have the courage to listen to that gut feel? And I struggle the most with is that level area of myself. There's this concept of fail fast and make decisions quickly. I have an uncle who's a business turnaround wizard. And his thing would just make a lot of decisions very quickly. You only have to be 51% correct. And I really struggle with that. One of those that agonizes forever about this thing. Should I do it or not? And et cetera, et cetera. And I had to think about one area, especially as the volatility of the world is increasing. I could add one superpower would be make decisions ruthlessly, quickly, and just get on with it.
But I love that insight about the layers of where the decisions are coming from. I think that's super helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Salim, thank you so much for joining us today and for all your insights. And folks, if you haven't ordered it already, get the second edition of Exponential Organizations. You will be glad that you did.
Thank you so much.
Many thanks to both of you.
And until next time, folks, remember, The world is evolving. Are you?